The Needle, a chapter in The Development of Embroidery in America by Candace Wheeler. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Schneider. Introductory, The Story of the Needle. The story of embroidery includes in its history all the work of the needle since Eve sewed fig leaves together in the Garden of Eden. We are the inheritors of the knowledge and skill of all the daughters of Eve in all that concerns its use since the beginning of time. When this small implement came open-eyed into the world, it brought with it possibilities of well-being and comfort for races and ages to come. It has been an instrument of beneficence as long ago as Dorcas sewed garments and gave them to the poor, and has been a creator of beauty since Sisera gave his mother a prey of needlework alike on both sides. This little descriptive phrase, alike on both sides, will at once suggest to all needlewomen a perfection of method almost without parallel. Of course it can be done, but the skill of it must have been rare, even in those far-off days of leisure, when duties and pleasures did not crowd out painstaking tasks, and every art was carried as far as human assiduity and invention could carry it. A history of the needlework of the world would be a history of the domestic accomplishment of the world, that inner story of the existence of man which bears the relation of him of sunlight to the plant. We can deduce from these needle records much of the physical circumstances of woman's long pilgrimage down the ages, of her mental processes, of her growth in thought. We can judge from the character of her art whether she was at peace with herself and the world, and from its status we become aware of its relative importance to the conditions of her life. There are few written records of its practice and growth, for an art which does not affect the commercial gain of a land or country is not apt to have a written or statistical history. But fortunately in this case the curious and valuable specimens which are left to us tell their own story. They reveal the cultivation and amelioration of domestic life. Their contribution to the refinements are their very existence. A history of any domestic practice which has grown into a habit marks the degree of general civilization, but the practice of needlework does more. To a careful student, each small difference in the art tells its own story in its own language. The hammered gold of Eastern embroidery tells not only of the riches of available material, but of the habit of personal preparation instead of the mechanical. The little Bible description of captured needlework alike on both sides speaks unmistakably of the method of their stitchery, a cross-stitch of colored threads, which is even now the only method to stitch alike on both sides. It is an endless and fascinating story of the leisure of women in all ages and circumstances, written in her own handwriting of painstaking needlework, and an estimate of an art to which gold, silver, and precious stones, the treasures of the world, were devoted. More than this, its intimate association with the growth and well-being of family life makes visible the point where savagery is left behind and the decrees of civilization begin. I knew a dear Bible-nourished, lonely little maid who had constructed for herself a drama of Eve in Eden, playing it for the solitary audience of self in a corner of the garden. She had brought all manner of fruits and had tied them to the fence palings under the apple boughs. This little Eve gathered grape leaves and sewed them carefully onto an apron, the needle holes pierced with a thorn and held together by fibers stripped from long-stemmed plantain leaves. Here she and her audience of self hid under the apple boughs and waited for the call of the Lord. The long ministry of the needle to the wants of mankind proves it to have been among the first of man's inventions. When Eve sewed fig leaves, she probably improvised some implement for the process, and every daughter of Eve, from Eden to the present time, has been indebted to that little implement for expression of herself in love and duty and art. For this we must thank the man who, the Bible relates, was the father of all such as worked in metals, and made needles, and gave them to his household. He is the first handyman mentioned in history, blessed be his memory. If the day should ever come, not, let us hope, in our time or that of our children, when the manufacturer shall find it no longer pays to make needles, what value will attach to individual specimens? If they were only to be found in occasional bric-a-brac shops or in the collections of some far-seeing hoarder of rarities, it would be difficult to overrate the interest which might attach to them. How, from the prodigal disregard of ages and the mysteries of the past, would emerge one after another recovered specimens to be examined and judged and classified and arranged. Perhaps collections of them will be found in future museums under different headings, such as Needles of Consolation, under which might come those which Mary Stuart and her maids wrought their dismal hours into pathetic bits of embroidery during the long days of captivity, or the daughter of the sorrowful Marie Antoinette mended the dilapidations of the pitiful and ragged Dauphin, or Needles of Devotion, wielded by canonized and uncanonized saints in and out of nunneries, or Needles of History, like those with which Matilda stitched the prowess of William the Conqueror into breadths of woven flax. Possibly there may arise needle experts who, upon microscopic examination and scientific test, will refer all specimens to possible date and peculiar function, and by so doing let in floods of light upon ancient customs and habits. It is idle to speculate upon a condition which does not yet exist, for happily needles for actual hand sewing are yet in sufficient demand to allow us to indulge in their purchase quite ungrudgingly. I was once shown a needle, it was in Constantinople, which the dark-skinned owner declared had been treasured for 300 years in his family, and he affirmed it so positively and circumstantially that I accepted the statement as truth. In fact, what did it matter? It was an interesting lie or an interesting truth, whichever one might consider it, and the needle looked quite capable of sustaining another century or so of family use. Its eye was a polished triangular hole, made to carry strips of beaten metal, exactly such as we read of in the Bible as beaten and cut into strips for embroidery upon linen, such embroidery, in fact, as has often been burned in order to sift the pure gold from its ashes. Not only the history, but the poetry and song of all periods are starred with real and ideal embroideries. Noble and beautiful ladies, whose chief occupation seemed to have been the medicining of wounds, received in their honor or defense, or the broidering of scarves and sleeves with which to bind the helmets of their knights as they went forth to tourney or to battle. In these old chronicles the knights fought or made music with harp or voice, and the women ministered or made embroidery, and so pictured lives which were lived in the days of knights and ladies drifted on. The sword and the needle express the duties, the spirit, and the essence of their several lives. The men were militant, the women domestic, and wherever in castle or house or nunnery the lives of women were made safe by the use of the sword, the needle was devoting itself to comforts of clothing for the poor and the dependent, or luxuries of adornment for the rich and powerful. So the needle lived on through all the civilizations of the Old World, in the various forms which they developed, until it was finally inherited by pilgrims to a new world, and was brought with them to the wilderness of America. End of The Needle.